Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this The Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And today we are talking about a rather cynical move from Labour to try and get even more devolved power in their own hands. This was part of the reason that Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales ended up with devolved parliaments, because the whole idea was that Blair effectively wanted to pass out power from Parliament not just to the civil service but also to these devolved parliaments, where he was hoping that even if the Tories win Parliament, you would still have Labour in the devolved parliaments. Now, that was true of Wales pretty much since it's ever been created, but in Scotland, obviously, the SNP took over, and Northern Ireland no one really cares about, so that's got its own politics, really. However, their plans, which I will get into later, have caused a bit of a ruckus. So, government refuses to say if next year's local council elections will go ahead. Nick Ferrari LBC asked if the 2025 elections for 21 local councils and 10 unitary authorities will go ahead, but local government minister Jin McMahon refuses to say there will be a full consultation instead. And here's the clip of that.
There are 21 county councils in England and 10 unitary authorities as well, all up for election in May. Will every one of those elections go ahead, Minister?
So more details will follow later on. I'll be making a statement in Parliament this afternoon that will set out the detail of that.
That's just a no, by the way, but Labour really don't want to say no, those elections aren't going to head, because it doesn't make them sound very good, especially when they constantly go on about democracy, and my god, we're going to get into that later. But you may be wondering, well, why aren't these elections going ahead? What possible reason do they have? Don't worry, we'll get into it, but first, let's finish the clip.
But this is an open invitation.
So they won't be then, Minister?
But it's an open invitation for councillors who want to be part of an early tranche of reorganisation and devolution.
Why aren't they all going ahead?
This is a really feeble attempt to try and avoid the direct question being asked, and I do mean that. And again, it's because you really don't want the soundbite of, oh, are these council elections going ahead? No, they're not, Nick. Because that is just, and this is the problem with modern politics, pretty much all over the world. Because of the age of social media, everyone's trying to get that 7-second TikTok or Twitter clip to post everywhere saying, oh, Labour are anti-democratic. And to be honest with you, the reason behind there not being elections isn't actually completely unreasonable on the surface level of it, but again, I'll get into the details later. For now, this is just a car crash.
And I would say, even before the white paper has been published,
maybe there's a problem with the line. Why aren't they going ahead, Minister?
Now, Nick Ferrari is being incredibly charitable here and giving the minister an out. Reiterating the question, he's given him plenty of time to actually think about the question ahead and said, possibly there's a problem with the line. Can you please answer this question I am asking directly now? Perhaps you didn't hear me. And I don't buy it. I think he heard him perfectly well. I think he was just trying to ignore the question. Because again, he doesn't want a clip where it takes someone like me a few minutes to actually basically tell you that he's saying no.
Well, at the moment, the assumption is that elections are going ahead. However, it's usual in a process of reorganisation that when a council makes a request for reorganisation, that if there are elections taking place to a council that it essentially won't exist within the term of those elections, then you hold off the elections and you elect to a shadow body, and the shadow body basically is a form of the new councils that will follow. So
long story short, he is trying to say, oh, well, we're going ahead with the assumptions that there are elections going ahead. However, with some reorganisation going on in councils, then that means that in fact you're electing a shadow body rather than the actual council. And that was his way of avoiding the actual news, which was this. Some council elections will be postponed from May 25. All 21 county councils asked to send in restructuring plans by mid-January. Ministers select a first round of councils and lay legislation to postpone elections by mid to late February, and they are postponed until 2026 or 2027. Which again, to everyone, just looks like a direct attack on democracy, if you will. Council elections, they happen, after a set amount of time. I think it's every 5 years. I'm not entirely sure, but you get the point. There are council terms that have a set time, but it appears that they are being postponed. And an awful lot of councils are Labour run, especially after the devastating 14 years from Tories where absolutely nobody trusted them. And so a lot of people have taken the assumption that, oh, this is Labour just trying to hold on to power for another year or two, which I can understand why the layman would say that. However, Labour's plan to try and hold on to power is a little more complicated than this brazen attack on democracy, to be absolutely fair to them. And there were some people, such as Election Maps UK, trying to claim that actually, oh, the Tories saying that this is an attack on democracy and that Labour tried to hold on to power. Look at all these county councils held by the Tories, which is a pretty stupid thing to say, because of the news as what's happening to these councils. Because these counties are basically going to be completely restructured, as Angela Rayner promises, a mayor for every region of England, which, at least in my experience, mayors are either seen by people as the best thing to happen in politics since sliced bread. A lot of people seem to really like Andy Burnham, I think, because they don't realise what he actually does. Or you get Sadiq Khan, who basically everyone hates, unless they're a leftist and assume you only hate him because you're racist. You'll also notice, by the way, that both of those examples I just gave are both Labour Party mayors. This is Labour's plan to try and expand what it means to be a mayor, where mayors are going to end up being in charge of, and generally because mayors are the leader of metropolitan city councils, they are areas where you will see an awful lot of Labour voters. And as you will see, part of the idea is to try and incorporate these Lib Dem and also Tory counties to try and basically spread the power of Labour. This is where they are being somewhat clever about it. It's not just a simple, oh, they're desperate for an extra year or two in certain councils. No. It is to reduce the power of the county council because typically they are not Labour, they are either Lib Dem or Tory, as you saw. So under these proposals, the government wants to merge areas where there are currently two tiers of local authority, where there are district and county councils, in a bid to streamline the service. But the body representing district councils has warned the plans could spark turmoil and argued mega councils could undermine local decision making. This is the other thing about this. None of the councils really want this, obviously, because it encroaches on their power. In a speech announcing the plans, Rayner said devolution would be the default rather than the whim of a minister in Whitehall, and she described the UK as the most centralised country in Europe and pledged to end micromanaging by central government. Hang on. The UK is most centralised, true, and they want to get rid of micromanaging. Okay, you're going to do that by getting rid of the hierarchy of councils that mean that there doesn't need to be as much micromanaging. Also, this doesn't even matter. In the UK, something like 70-odd% of all our taxes go straight to Whitehall, or straight to HMRC, I should say. And that means that the remaining 20 to 30% only go to your local councils. Yeah, that's what makes it very centralised. Unless you're changing the way that tax works and the way that councils and government fund things, you're not going to get rid of the centralisation problem that you are claiming matters. Because that's not what it's about. This is just stuff that sounds nice. Oh, decentralisation, yeah, I like that. I don't want a centralised authority. Well, at least to most people. Rayner said the government would work with local leaders to deliver its plans, but where they are unable to agree on a way forward, ministers would get the power in law to knock heads together and create larger authorities. Okay. So they are going to talk to local leaders, and if they can't agree on the plans that Labour have for them, they will basically just overrule them. That's effectively what is being said there. Details of what devolution actually means are in detail in this article. So there are greater powers for Mayor to manage rail networks and introduce London-style public transport where buses, trains and trams are integrated into one system with pay-as-you-go fares and joined-up services. That actually might be really useful, to be fair to them. The ability to regulate bike hire schemes and tackle the scourge of badly parked e-bikes. Okay, I don't know why that needs to necessarily be added to the mayor's powers, but okay. Giving local groups the right to buy under threat community assets such as youth clubs, pubs, libraries and sports facilities. Oh, right to buy is good now, is it, Angela Rayner? Local government in England is currently covered by a complicated patchwork of arrangements that have changed a lot in recent years. In some places, responsibility for local services is shared between county councils, which manage areas including social care and education, and district councils, which cover smaller areas and are responsible for services such as bin collections. I mean, bins are always collected, so this doesn't seem like that big an issue. But like most things, this was something that the Tories brought in and that Labour are going to make even worse. So the Tories created 11 such areas, which were these unitary authorities, which were responsible for larger regions than necessarily these councils had power over. And they have metro mayors. They set a target that every part of England that wanted greater powers in some form would get devolution by 2030, but despite this, around half of England's population live in an area not covered by a devolution deal, and the Labour government basically wants to extend that local power, but they're taking advantage of it, as I say, by merging a lot of these councils into these metropolitan mayoral areas, which again typically vote Labour, which is why they are so desperate to push this. So again, Labour is trying to grab onto more power, it's just not in the way you would necessarily think from this whole, oh, they're cancelling council elections. If you are rejigging councils, it makes sense to postpone them until after they've been rejigged. I don't actually have a problem with that. I do have a problem that the rejigging is going to obviously favour Labour, which has been their plan ever since, well, probably all along, but devolution, that was openly just to keep Labour in power in the devolved parliament. They're calling this devolution as well, because it's basically the same plan. And in the biggest case of these changes in action, the district councils in Gloucestershire will be abolished and one powerful council will instead run all the county services. Regional mayors will also be introduced for all areas, with one possibly taking charge of a new Wessex authority. Part of sweeping reforms for England that we basically just went through, put forward by Angela Rayner. The change is the greatest in Gloucestershire, as it is one of the dwindling number of counties to still have 2 tiers of local government. Some familiar names will go, such as Stroud, Cotswolds, Twexbury, the Forest of Dean, Cheltenham and Gloucester, and they'll merge into with the county council into this unitary metropolitan council. This is similar to what happened in Somerset in April 2023 and was meant to be simpler for local residents and save millions of pounds, but the Liberal Democrat-run Somerset councillors face major financial difficulties, as has many of these large councils, such as, Birmingham. And sure, it's not going to be the case that absolutely every single one of these results in Labour being in charge. Obviously, the Liberal Democrats run the Somerset Council. However, they are definitely going to have more power than they did before, which is a pretty naked attempt to try and get more devolved power while the power in Westminster dwindles by the day. Just get it all out of there. We're not going to hold Westminster forever. Let's fast track these metropolitan councils where we tend to do better because they're in city centres, and have a ring around of typically Tory or Lib Dem voting councils to have to be under our power too. It's pretty blatant that this is happening. So this faulty reasoning has given ammunition to sceptics, including the Lib Dem leader of the Cotswolds District Council. The example of Somerset, where they're having real challenges now with their financial position, just demonstrates that this is not the silver bullet that everyone thinks. We're willing to engage, but it has to be right. A change coming to many more places will be on the rollout of Metro mayors. At the moment, the region's only one is Dan Norris, who leads the West of England Combined Authority, and he works with the council leaders of Bristol, South Gloucestershire and Bath and North East Somerset. New mayors could cover even bigger areas. I don't know why the BBC don't mention this, but Dan Norris is a Labour mayor. Once again, adding to the point that these mayors are typically Labour, and if they are not, they will be Green or Lib Dem. Every now and then you may get a Tory one. Though who knows, this might be a massive shot in the foot for Labour, because you never know. Reform could come in and absolutely sweep these mayor elections up. And if that happens, this will just be the funniest thing ever. But what makes this even funnier is the way some, despite doing all of this, postponing elections, attacking democracy, having a shake-up of the way everything works to try and centralise power to cities where Labour have the most voters, this is what Harriet Harmer of the Labour Party had to say about reform. So she starts by talking about Labour's reaction to their situation.
Was really in denial about the situation. If you look at the council by-election results, is that they show a real fall in Labour's support.
Yep, which is typically the opposite of what happens once you win a general election. Usually, there is momentum there. It's gone the other way. They've lost pretty much a third of their support if you, as Harriet Harman goes on to say, look at their percentages.
If you look at the percentage change, it's not just about who's won,
but
it's who's voting and what the percentage change is.
Yeah, this is Harriet Harman realising, Labour are really screwed, which then brings her on to why they're screwed.
And reform from a standing start is like gaining 40%, whereas the Labour's down, but the Tories are massively down as well.
Yep. It's really good news for reform, I do agree. And then she's asked for her thoughts on reform, given that they're doing so well.
Well, I think people should be very concerned about reform because they're not just a threat to individual parties, but I actually think they're a threat to democracy because they are offering easy answers to real problems.
I mean, for a start, a threat to democracy because they are giving easy answers. I'm sorry, did you miss your own manifesto? Are you serious? But on top of that, a threat to democracy, what, by reshuffling all the councils to try and effectively gerrymander your way into these mayoral seats? Yeah, I don't think so. But also, once again, someone who doesn't know what reform actually stands for, they want proportional representation, which, you know, I don't personally want, but if you're going to say that that's anti-democratic, I don't know what to tell you. They even want to make the House of Lords a elected house, which again I'm not necessarily for, but it's certainly better than what it is now, which is a corrupted mess of effectively a free seat and free money for party donors. So again, much more democratic, we can definitely say, than the Labour Party, who are carrying on with that and are even quite open to being happy to being blatantly bankrolled by people in the Lords. So it's just an absolute nonsense accusation to level at reform. She gives it away straight away by saying, oh, they're a threat to individual parties. But she can't just say that, because then it just looks like she's coping and seething. So she goes even more coping and seething to saying, oh yeah, no, totally, they're a complete mess and they are a disaster for democracy, despite the fact that, you know, the democratic policies are, kind of hate to say it, they're not too far away from the Green parties. As I say, it's definitely their worst policies, but my God, we're in such a mess, I kind of have to take the good with the bad. So that's where we're up to. We are up to the point where Labour are quite blatantly happy to, as I say, gerrymander councils, to take away powers from these smaller councils that typically are either independent, Lib Dem, possibly even Green or Tory, but certainly not particularly Labour, and try and get them in this big wide net of a metropolitan area that is going to be overwhelmingly Labour, because that is what metropolitan areas are like. But with that, I think that's everything I had for you for today. So streams, we've got Tosh News tonight. Oh my God, I have to go set that up. I will be joined with the standard Tharium, along with community members, so do come along to that tonight over on the Worcester Club, 9 PM. Saturday it's Laughing at the Guardian, so look forward to that as well. Still going to be fun and games, and videos out as and when I can make them. As I said earlier in the week, I do have a busy week, but I have managed to make a few videos in advance, so you should be able to get your fix. The things I do for you, in return, do subscribe. That is the only thing I ask. It's mainly because it's free from you. And then obviously, if you feel that my content is worth it, do become a member, where you can have access to some of my older streams, or you can send super chats and super thanks when possible. It's all stuff that massively helps the channel. So with that, that's everything I had for you for today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.